What's going on? It's 10 days to Christmas. And if that caused any anxiety in any of you, which is exactly why we need this series, we're going to be continuing, in our series, Hustle and Bustle. And if you were with us last week, we talked about the reality how for so many of us, this season just becomes this crazy, chaotic, hectic season. And is just part of it, because we've been in it for so long, we just have a tendency to lose sight of what really matters most. We have a tendency to lose sight of the fact that Christmas is all about Jesus. And a lot of that is because we just have a lot of other things going on. And last week, as we talked about the launch of the series, we said one of the things that just happens is Christmas is all of our time, all of the time that we have, it just gets absorbed. And I like that word absorbed because I literally just started thinking of a sponge and how just sponges suck things up. And I remember at some point, not too long ago, I could have looked at my calendar and had all of this open space, all of this free time, but suddenly now all of it's gone. Like it just all got sucked up in other things and other events and obligations that I have to do. And so many of us have very similar stories. And part of the reason that happens, I believe one of the main reasons it happens is because Christmas has become about one more thing to do, one more person to see, one more gift to buy, instead of it being about the one thing. And so we talked a lot about, like, how do we begin to create time to have more space to focus on the one thing? And one of the things I told you guys last week was the best way to begin to move from one more thing to the one thing is learn how to say no. And I know that there was a lot of you that had a lot of fun with that this week. This week at home, pretty much whatever I would ask my wife anything, she would just say no. Like before I even got my question out. What was this applause? This is a bad thing. Monday morning, I went into Panera Bread to order a cup of coffee. I was out in that neighborhood, and I walked in. I said, "Can I get a cup of coffee?" And the person behind the register said, "No." They're obviously from Lake Sawyer. They laughed. We laughed. We had a moment. A lot of us probably had some fun this week with that idea of leveraging no. But the truth is, there's also some of us that really struggled this past week, because we recognize that saying no is difficult. Saying no to something or to some people is a hard thing to do. It has a potential to actually hurt someone's feelings. And so we really struggled with whether or not we were going to leverage a no or not. Maybe some of us did, and now we're living with the ramifications of what that means. Even though we know the intentions behind it were good, even though we didn't say no to hurt someone's feeling, we said no to move beyond one more thing, to have time to focus on the one thing, but that doesn't mean it still wasn't difficult. And I know that there's also some of you who maybe had the best of intentions to say no, but quite honestly, guilt got to you first. Guilt got to you before you could say no. If you weren't with us this past weekend, last one, I would encourage you to go online to lakesawyerchurch.org, and you can watch that message. I think it will really help set the stage for what we're going to be talking about over the next 2 weeks leading into Christmas Eve. This weekend, we're going to be talking about relationships. And relationships are really part of what makes this Christmas season so wonderful, but at the same time, relationships are also part of what makes this season very difficult. You see, a lot of us, we have these relationships, we have memories and moments tied to family, and some of us reflect back on those moments, we reflect back on those memories, and we're filled with excitement and joy because Christmas has been about great memories and great moments and great relationships with the people that we love. But at the same time, there's also some of us who reflect back on those memories, who reflect back on those moments, who reflect back on the relationships of our childhood, and they're not necessarily greeted with that same level of excitement and joy. And so part of it is Christmas, for some of us, brings up the reality of broken relationships. And then the third piece is, for some of us, Christmas reminds us of loved ones that are lost. 3 years ago, rather unexpectedly, my wife's dad passed away. And Bob loved Christmas. Like, he absolutely loved Christmas. And so there's all these times throughout the year that I'm reminded of my father-in-law. I'm reminded of how much I miss him. But when we come to the Christmas season, one of his most favorite times of the year, those feelings of loss are amplified. And I know that that's not just my story. It's a story for so many of us. And again, that's part of what makes Christmas, for some of us, the most wonderful time of the year, but at the same time, for others of us, it can be one of the most difficult seasons of the year. And what we know, because we're human, is that relationships are a natural part of life. Like, all of us, we're relational beings. It's how God created us. We're always in relationship with one another. We are created to be in relationships, and the truth is, specifically when it comes to Christmas, those relationships are unavoidable. They're just a part of this season. And so for many of us, especially those of us who don't have these wonderful, joyous memories of Christmas, we almost like literally throw up our hands in the air and say, well, it is what it is. And maybe you don't literally throw your hands up in the air, but for some of us, we just approach Christmas and we look at the relationships and the obligations and the expectations that we have, and we think, okay, well, it is what it is. Let's just get through this season. Let's just get on with life. Let's just put our head down, and before we know it, it will be over. But here's the thing. We don't want you to just get through it, because we believe that there's a better way, a way that Mary, Jesus' mother, modeled in her own life. Literally, it's probably the lesser known part of the Christmas story, but that's what I want to talk about today. And the build up to that moment happens beginning in Luke chapter 1. Luke is one of the two gospels, the books that tell us about the life and ministry of Jesus, that record his birth narrative. And it's kind of the setup for what we're going to talk about today. Mary has just received incredible, life-changing news. That Mary has just found out that she is going to be a mother, and like, that news in itself is big news, but it's not just that Mary's going to become a mother that's kind of world-changing for her. It's the fact about how she's going to become a mother. That God is going to do something through her that the world has never seen before. And that's literally where we're going to pick up in Luke chapter 1, that she's just been told that God is going to do something through you. That God is going to give you a child, and that child is going to have incredible significance to the world that he will be born into. And then the angel who shares this news begins to say to Mary some of the other things that are going to happen as this child is born. This is what the angel says, beginning in Luke chapter 1. He, being Jesus, will be great and will be called the Son of the Most High. Now, this phrase, Most High, maybe it doesn't mean a lot to us, but in the ancient world, this was a very well-known phrase. This phrase for the people of Israel, it was actually a title that was given to God. It was an acknowledgement that quite literally that there is no one above God, that he is the highest. And now Mary's hearing that this thing that God is going to do, this child that will be born from her, is the Son of the Most High, literally the Son of God. I mean, this is a lot of news to wrestle with, but this isn't all that the angel says. The angel continues. The Lord God will give Jesus, the throne of his father David, and he will reign over Jacob's descendants forever. His kingdom will never end. You see, the nation of Israel, it was God's nation. They were God's chosen people. He's the one that quite literally spoke them into existence. And the throne for his people was entirely God's to give. And so God decided to give that throne to Jesus, the throne of his father David. Now again, depending on your familiarity with the Christmas story, this phrase right here might surprise you, his father David, because you're thinking, well, I thought Joseph was Jesus' father. And the answer is you're absolutely right, that Joseph was Jesus' father. Joseph is a significant part of the Christmas story, but the truth is, in ancient Israel, more than who you were, more important than who you were, was the family that you came from. And that's part of Joseph's story. You see, Joseph came through the lineage of King David. As you trace back his heritage, you find David in that family line. You also find Jacob in his descendants in that family line. And if you trace it back even further, you find Abraham, the one that God hand chose to make into a great nation, his nation. And now what the angel is sharing with Mary in this moment is that your son Jesus will follow in the line of these great people, in the line of David, in the line of Jacob, and one day rule over the nation that God has chosen. You see, in this moment, God hand selects this family to place Jesus in to carry out his perfect plan for this world. This is what Mary is wrestling with. I mean, this is huge news. This is life-altering news. I mean, can you just even imagine what it would be like to get news like this? Like, just try to imagine putting yourself in Mary's shoes, and she's hearing this. You have to be thinking, like, what in the world does this mean? Like, what do you do with this information? Like, what does it mean to have God's child? What does it look like? How do I raise him so that he comes up and knows what he's supposed to do to one day rule over God's people? Like, I'm thinking if this was me in Mary's shoes, like, these are the questions that I would be asking. Like, these were the things that I would be wrestling with. Like, how does this play out in real life? But what we know is, quite honestly, this is really none of the things that Mary was wrestling with. Mary's not thinking this. I'm not even sure Mary heard anything else the angel said beyond the original proclamation of what was about to happen. And I believe that because of what Mary says next. This is Mary's response. How will this be, Mary asked, since I am a virgin? Mary's like, wait, hold on a second. Like, I don't even know what you said. I'm like still caught up on this part. Like, how is this actually going to happen? Like, how does this play out? Because, like, I'm still a virgin. Like, that's, I know how some of this works, medically, and there's something missing. Like, Mary is caught up on this point right here. And here's why this is important to me. Because I think some of us, we're so familiar with these stories. We know them that sometimes we lose some of the significance of what is happening. Like, what does that look like? How does this play out? How is this fulfilled in her life? What does it look like, again, for her to raise Jesus, the Son of God, the one who will ascend to the throne? As Mary wrestles with this information, I'm sure pretty quickly the second piece comes. Well, who do I tell? Like, who do I tell with this information? Now, we do know that she tells Joseph. Matthew records that in his gospel account of the birth narrative of Jesus. And that's not an easy conversation. How do you tell your husband to be what the angel has just told you? That's not a conversation you're looking forward to. But we also know that Mary decided to tell someone else. And this is that lesser known part of the Christmas story. This is what we read beginning in verse 39. At that time, Mary got ready and hurried to a town in the hill country of Judea, where she entered Zechariah's home and greeted Elizabeth. So again, after she kind of puts her mind around this information, after she kind of figures out what this is going to look like, how it's going to play out, actually realizes that God is going to do something through her, and as a servant of God, she will follow what God is calling her to do. After she wrestles with all of this, she tries to get ready and put herself together, like pick herself up off the floor, basically, and heads out to the hill country of Judea to go visit her cousin, Elizabeth. And now the journey from where she's at to the hill country of Judea is about an 80-mile journey. So this is not an easy journey. It's not a quick journey, but she wants to go and spend time with her cousin. Now, Elizabeth is with child as well, and that's part of that Christmas story that we see in the gospel accounts. And when Mary gets to Elizabeth, the moment that she walks into the house, this is what we read. When Elizabeth heard Mary's greeting, the baby inside Elizabeth leaped in her womb, and Elizabeth was filled with the Holy Spirit. I mean, the baby inside Elizabeth hears Mary's voice. The whole world seems to understand the significance of what God is doing in this moment. And the baby just starts dancing around in her tummy. And the baby's excited. We know that Mary's excited. We know that Elizabeth is excited. And we know this because listen what Elizabeth's response is. She says, in a loud voice, she exclaims, "Blessed are you among women, and blessed is the child you will bear." And for Elizabeth, this is a joyous occasion. Now, the thing is, we don't know some of the specifics of the timeline. We don't know how long it was between Mary finding out and her going to Elizabeth, but in this moment, none of that seems to matter. For Mary and for Elizabeth, this is a joyous moment. A moment to share together that they're both with child, but the child inside of Mary is a special child. And as I imagine this scene playing out in my mind, I imagine like when they talk, like Elizabeth's excited and she probably jumps up and she grabs Mary and embraces Mary. And I imagine them just like jumping up and down, spinning around in circles, overwhelmed with the excitement of what this means, the potential that this child has for humanity. It got me thinking a lot about birth announcements. You know, I remember finding out that Danielle was pregnant with our first child. And it was kind of an odd thing. I was away at a work trip. I was out of town on the East Coast, and at the time when I left, I didn't know that Danielle was pregnant. But when I was gone, Danielle found out that she was pregnant, that she was with child. I love the way the Bible says things. And it was one of those things, I'm sure like Mary, like she wanted to tell someone, but that's kind of the news that you reserve for a face-to-face interaction. But I had just got out of town, and so she thought, well, she has a few days to kind of plan this grand reveal to be able to tell me about the birth of our first child. And so she's hard at work at that. And now I'm oblivious on the East Coast, unaware of what the news my wife has. All I know is that I really miss my wife. And so it was very advantageous to me that the conference I was at just ended up early. And so I hatched this plan. I thought, this is great. I will go home early, and I will surprise Danielle, and it'll be great. I'll be a good husband, and I'll get to see her because I miss her. And so I started calling the airlines, and the airlines were gracious enough to work with me, to put me on a plane to fly home a day early. The only thing I needed to do to make my plan successful was to come up with a reason for Danielle why I couldn't answer my phone for like 5 hours. And so I don't remember what I said, but I came up with some plan. I arranged the pickup at the airport so she wouldn't have to pick me up. She was planning to do that the next day. And I got on the plane. I flew home. I got picked up. I drove to the house. I snuck up to the front door. Again, completely oblivious. My wife is hard at work planning something herself. I knock on the door. She opens the door, surprised look on her face. And I yell, "Surprise!" And she yells, "We're pregnant!" And I'm not even kidding, like tears. Like just, I like it just hit me. I grabbed her. I'm pretty sure I started jumping up and down, spinning around in circles. Like birth announcements are great moments. They're exciting moments. They're the moments that we get to choose the people that we want to tell. We get to choose the relationships that we value the most and the people that we want to share that with. Like fast forward a few years, we were pregnant with our second child, Elena, and we kind of got past that first stage where, you don't tell anybody because you want to make sure the baby's healthy. And we were coming into Christmas morning. We thought, this is great. We'll get all of our parents together and make them open up a gift. And so we got them together. They all opened up the same present. They pulled out the ultrasound. They were all excited. They all started crying. I started crying. Like it's amazing moments. Birth announcements are amazing, exciting moments. And here's one of the things I love most about birth announcements. And it's one of the things that we see in Mary's story, and it's this. We get to choose. Like we get to choose the people we tell. We get to choose how we tell them, when we tell them, where we tell them. Like this is entirely our choice. Like no one told Mary that she had to go to Elizabeth. Like no one forced that upon her. It wasn't an expectation. It wasn't an obligation. Mary decided to go to Elizabeth because it was a relationship that mattered to her. It's something that she wanted to share with someone that she chose to share with. And we seem to get that with birth announcements. Like we seem to understand that it's up to the parents. It's their choice. But for some reason, when it comes to Christmas, we feel like we completely lose our right to choose. Like somehow we no longer get to choose to prioritize the relationships that matter the most to us. And what happens is the world or other people prioritize our time. They prioritize what they think are important relationships, and we lose the right to choose. And when we do that, for many of us, it just kind of demotivates us. And Christmas then becomes a season that we just need to put our heads down and get through. But what I want you to understand is just like Mary, when it comes to your relationships in this Christmas season, you get to choose. You get to choose who you spend time with and who you don't. And I understand that that doesn't mean the choice will be easy. It's never easy. But I want you to understand the choice is yours nonetheless. Last weekend I shared about how crazy and chaotic my Christmas was growing up. We had all these events going on surrounding Christmas. Then as I got older, there were other events that were introduced into that season. But you know what happens when you get married? You take your crazy, chaotic normal and you attempt to blend it with someone else's crazy, chaotic normal. And so for a season, it was like, okay, how do we manage to put two families together in such a way that everyone gets what they want out of Christmas, that everyone's happy? And Danielle and I worked incredibly hard to manage that and to make it happen. And what we ultimately got to was that everyone was happy. Everyone was happy with how Christmas played out. Everyone except us. We weren't happy. We were just busy. And we fast forwarded a few years and we had kids of our own, and then it was like, oh my gosh, like now our kids are a part of this and they're being raised up with the same expectation that all of us been raised up in, that Christmas is this crazy, chaotic time of the year, that Christmas is about hustle and bustle. And we started to talk about that and look at that, and we realized we don't want that to be true for our kids. Like, we don't want them to be relationally obligated to do things. We want to understand, for them to understand that they get the right to choose. And the best way that they can understand that is for their parents to model that, to choose to prioritize which relationships matter the most to them. And so it wasn't easy, but Danielle and I, we sat down our families and we told them that Christmas, specifically Christmas morning, was only going to be about our family, our immediate family, me, Danielle, and the kids. That's it. And maybe in a special year, we would invite a grandparent to be a part of it, but that's not the normal thing. Because we want to choose to prioritize our kids. We want to choose to prioritize Jesus in this season. And so we made that choice. And I'm going to be honest with you, that choice, it wasn't received warmly. People were pretty upset with us. They didn't like what we were choosing. And I know that as I share that, there are some of you here who are sitting here and you're thinking, you wish you could do the same thing. You wish you could say, I want to prioritize some relationships over the other. You wish you could say, I want to choose these people. That doesn't mean I don't love these people, but I want to choose these relationships in the season. You want to be able to do that, but maybe you're sitting here and you're terrified or you're apprehensive to do just that because you know that if you do, that someone will be affected by your choice. And so you commit to do what you've always done, and when you do that, you miss out on creating what you've always wanted. And so you don't choose. And ultimately, you let others choose for you. And I know that there's also some of you in this room that would be greatly affected if someone you loved made this choice. Maybe it's your kids. Maybe it's other family members, but maybe if there was someone in your family who said, you know what, I love you, but I don't want you to be a part of our Christmas because I'm going to choose to prioritize these relationships in this moment, you would be impacted by that. And you're thinking, Mike, this is the worst message you've ever given in your entire life because if my kids are here, you have just ruined my Christmas. And I get it. I get it because I fast forward, like I've got young kids, I try to fast forward to when they're older and they're adults and they have kids of their own, and I try to put myself and think, well, what is it gonna look like if they choose to prioritize relationships in such a way that leave me out of Christmas? And I'm not gonna lie, it would be incredibly hard. Like every parent wants that moment with their kids. You introduce grandkids in it, and every parent wants that moment with their grandkids. And so I try to fast forward and think, what would it look like if I wasn't a part of that? And I would wrestle with it. And I would struggle with how that would impact me. But here's what I also realize. If I become about filling my kids, filling my family's calendar, with one other thing, with one more time obligation, with one more relational obligation, then quite honestly, I'm perpetuating what I do not want to perpetuate. Because I have made Christmas for them. And ultimately someday their kids, they'll experience the same thing. That Christmas will become more about making people happy, meeting relational obligations, than actually focusing on Jesus. And if that happens, as hard as it might be, if that happens, then the truth is, I don't win. I don't win. My kids don't win. Someday my grandkids won't win. Because Christmas will become about hustle and bustle and not Jesus. And the truth is, I want them to have Jesus. And I want them to focus on him. And if I have to forfeit my desires during this season, as hard as it is going to be, I'm going to do it. I'm going to let them choose. And for some of us here, maybe that's what we need to take away from this message. That there are people in your life, maybe your kids, maybe your family, there are people that you have put pressure on to choose you this season. And maybe the greatest gift that you can give those people is the free, guilt-free right to choose. Because you know, if you do, that you're pushing back against what this season has become about. That you're pushing back against hustle and bustle. That you're pushing back against relational obligations. And you're allowing your family the space to focus on the people they want to focus on and the person who Christmas is all about. You see, you get to choose. We get to choose. They get to choose. Mary got to choose. But it was also a choice that Jesus modeled in his own life. In the start of the Gospel of Mark, Jesus is busy. There is a lot of things that are going on. There's a lot of healings that Jesus is doing. Like people are coming to Jesus and he's healing them. And there's no end in sight to the needs of people. People who want a relational connection. People who want Jesus to prioritize them in his life. And on one particular day, after a really busy season of healing people, this is what we read, beginning in Mark chapter 1. Very early in the morning, while it was still dark, Jesus got up, left the house, and went off to a solitary place where he prayed. Really early in the morning, Jesus got up and he got out. And he decided to go and to spend time with the Father. He decided in light of all the needs of people, in light of all of the relational obligations and expectations that they have for him, instead of letting that be his burden and instead of letting someone else choose how he prioritizes his time, Jesus models for us that he's going to prioritize what matters most, that he's going to prioritize time with his Father. And that's one of the things I love most about Jesus is you see this all throughout his life again and again and again. You see that he prioritizes time with God. He makes a point, and for so many of us, that should serve, for all of us really, that should serve as a model to how we should prioritize our relationships, how we should prioritize our time. But what I love about Jesus is he's not only models it with his life, but he helps those who follow him understand of how this actually plays out in their lives. And so in Mark 6, we see this interaction that Jesus has with some of his apostles. He has just sent this group of 12 out to do ministry, out to meet the needs of people. And when this group gets back, they're exhausted, they're tired. And this is what we read. Jump to Mark 6. The apostles gathered around and reported to him all they had done and taught. So the apostles, they go out, they do all this healing, they meet the needs of people, they come back, they gather around Jesus, and they're excited to tell them all that they've done. Like all of the needs that they met, all of the people that they've helped, and all of this, they're excited to share with Jesus what had happened. But the truth is, just like Jesus' experience, the needs didn't stop, right? People always have needs. People always wanted more. The apostles are experiencing this firsthand. Like more people want them to choose to connect with them. They want to have the apostles prioritize that relationship. And so this is what we read in the next verse. Then because so many people were coming and going, they did not have a chance to eat. Like we've probably all experienced this in our life, right? Like when we prioritize the needs of others above our own, we actually work in such a way that causes detriment to us in our own lives. And so this is what the apostles are struggling with. Like they got back, there's still people that want more, they're coming and going, they need more help. And so the apostles have gotten to this place where they're just prioritizing the needs of others over their own health. And see, I think in this moment, as Jesus is seeing this, he realizes what they don't. He realizes what so many of us fail to see is that we have a choice. Like we get to choose. And so this is what Jesus says to them. He said to them, "Come with me. Choose me. Prioritize a relationship with me. And come by yourself." So I imagine they're like, well, like this person wants to come, and like if I go and I don't invite this person, then that person's going to be upset. And well, if I invite this person but not that person, then that person's going to be upset. Like we get in the mindset where we're trying to figure it all out. He says, don't worry about any other relationship. Come with me by yourself to a quiet place and get some rest. See, I think the reason why we don't live out this part in Christmas, that we don't experience a season of rest in Christmas, is because we allow other people to choose for us. We allow other people to tell us which relationships get prioritized in this season. But what I hope you understand is you don't have to live like that. You don't have to meet the needs of other people. There's seasons where that's important. But what about in this season? What if in this season you really took hold of the fact that you will choose to prioritize the relationships that matter the most to you during Christmas? And what would it look like for you to begin to live that out? Would it be hard? Yes, it's going to be hard. I understand firsthand. It's going to be hard. Will people get hurt? Probably. There'll probably be some people who are upset if you choose to prioritize a different relationship than what they were hoping that you would prioritize. But if you want to move beyond the hustle and bustle of Christmas, then you have to make choices. You have to determine, with a finite amount of time that you have, how do you use it? And who do you spend that time with? If you don't, someone else will choose for you. And you will feel obligated, and Christmas will be just another thing to get through. Even though you're not happy, you've done something that makes other people happy. And that's not what Christmas is about. Because when you go through Christmas with hurt feelings, when you go through Christmas with a just get through it mentality, you lose the heart of Christmas. You lose the fact that Jesus is the very center. And so I'm going to encourage you to prioritize your relationships in such a way that creates time and space to be able to focus on him. And think about the example that you're setting for your family, for your kids, for the people that you come in contact with, that you refuse to go along with the normal hustle, bustle part of Christmas. Let's pray. God, I thank you so much for Mary. And I thank you for the example that she shares. And God, I pray that we would be the kind of people that would see that and understand that that choice, the choice to prioritize certain relationships at maybe the expense of others, is a choice that we have as well. And even though in this season it doesn't seem like it's a choice that we have, God, I pray that we would be bold enough to make it. I pray that we would look around and make some tough decisions to prioritize the relationships that we want to focus on and the relationships that matter the most to us in this season. And God, I also recognize that there's some of us who are here, quite honestly, who have put pressure on other people, who've made other people feel guilty for not prioritizing that specific relationship. And God, I pray that you would help those of us who struggle with that to understand that this season isn't about us filling our relational needs. This season's about focusing on what your son Jesus means for the world. And so God, I pray that we would be the kind of people who would be bold enough to release the people we love the most from the obligations and expectations we put on them, so that all of us would find not just the time, but the space to focus on you during this Christmas season. It's in Jesus' name we pray. Amen.